Why would a captain toss a $10,000 sniper rifle like it was worthless scrap? It clanged against the dirt floor of the tent, the Barrett MRAD bouncing once before Staff Sergeant Allar Voss caught it against her boot. The men laughed, not all of them, just enough to make it sting. Captain Derek Morrison stood with arms folded, his voice sharp with disdain. "Maybe the Girl Scout from Intel can figure out why real shooters can't hit with it," he said. The words hung there. Girl Scout. A jab meant to strip her down in front of the others. He didn't know her, not yet. He saw blonde hair pulled back under a patrol cap, hazel eyes focused on screens more than rifles. He saw an analyst, not an operator, not someone who could move the needle when lives hung on ounces of pressure through a trigger. She didn't flinch, not outwardly. She bent, picked up the rifle, and let her fingers glide across its surface the way others might trace scars. The bolt caught slightly, dust choking the extractor claw. She knew the problem before Morrison had even turned away, knew it like a doctor recognizes a failing heartbeat, but she said nothing, not yet. What no one in that tent knew was that 43 minutes later, Morrison's laughter would be gone, his hand trembling as he extended a coin reserved for those who saved entire teams from annihilation. And no one would ever call her Girl Scout again. For now she let the silence hang. Silence was a weapon. Out beyond the canvas walls, forward operating base Chapman groaned with its own rhythms. Diesel generators coughed. Dust devils spiraled across the motor pool. The Hindu Kush loomed beyond the wire, jagged ridgelines casting shadows like watchful eyes. At 7,200 feet, every step burned the lungs. Every breath felt like swallowing stone. But to Allar Voss it was familiar. Home wasn't the right word. Home was a ranch in Montana, long summers and frostbitten winters. But this place, this altitude, taught her who she was becoming. Most of the men here knew her as an analyst. That's what her file said. Intelligence non-commissioned officer. Support staff. The cover was perfect. She spent hours scanning drone feeds, annotating maps, building briefings. She could pass for someone whose war lived only in pixels and paper. But there were clues for anyone paying attention. The faint tattoo ring around her trigger finger, two concentric lines like scope reticles. The way she tracked mirages in the heat without thinking, eyes narrowing slightly as if she could read the wind like scripture. The little rituals, cleaning her rifle until every pin gleamed, torquing each screw with a surgeon's patience. None of that mattered to Morrison. He was new in theater, fresh from Campbell. He'd led men through training grounds, not mountains. He saw combat as something to command, not something that might rip you open. Swagger came easy when you hadn't felt the ground shake under mortar fire. He dismissed her concerns during the briefing earlier that morning. She pointed out a flaw in the overwatch grid, a dead zone about 400 meters out where insurgents could slip unseen. Morrison had cut her off mid-sentence, told her to stick to PowerPoints. The room had gone cold. Even the Afghan interpreter shifted uncomfortably, but Morrison had rank and rank 1. She told herself she didn't care. She'd heard worse. She'd been called worse. Yet alone, with only the rifle in her hands, she let herself feel the sharp edge of it. Not anger, not really. It was something quieter, a sadness she carried too often, the kind born of knowing your skills could save men who refused to see them. Her grandfather's voice came back to her, steady as Montana wind. Pride gets people killed, Allar. Ego pulls shots wide. You shoot to protect the ones who can't protect themselves, whether they respect you or not. He'd been a Marine Scout sniper, the kind who could still a prairie dog at 1,000 yards without a second thought. He taught her that between heartbeats lay eternity. That's where the perfect shot lived. She was 12 the first time she felt it, that space between seconds where the world went still. While other kids played video games, she was counting wind flags and calculating spin drift at 800 yards. And now, at 29, she lived her grandfather's lessons every day. She just wasn't allowed to admit it. Women weren't officially in combat roles when she came in. The Army found ways to bury her talents in the intel section. On paper, she didn't exist in firefights. In reality, she'd been attached to Task Force 88 for nearly 2 years, operating so far in the shadows that official reports erased her name. 43 confirmed kills. No recognition, not on paper. They credited the male spotters, the shooters near her position. But she didn't care. She kept every text from wives who never knew why their husbands made it home. She remembered every Afghan girl who walked to school because a man with matches never made it to her village. Those were the medals she polished at night. Still, the sting was real. Standing in that tent, rifle at her feet, surrounded by men who judged her without knowing, she felt the familiar weight of invisibility. She wanted to tell them. To say, "I've carried this rifle across mountains you'll never climb. I've felt the air shift when bullets pass too close. I've saved lives you'll never know you almost lost." But she said nothing. Instead, she studied Morrison. His posture, his tone, the way he carried himself. Men like him didn't bend until something snapped them. She wondered what it would take. Later in the TOC, she listened to the team's chatter as they prepped for insertion. Night op, rotary wing drop, same grid she'd warned about. She could feel the knot in her stomach tighten. She marked positions on the map anyway, knowing she'd never get credit if things went wrong, but needing to prepare all the same. Because she had seen this story before, seen it end badly. She thought of Jennifer Matthews, a friend, a sister in arms, even if unofficially. Jennifer had died 3 years earlier in Helmand when faulty intel walked their team into a kill zone. She'd never been recognized for the 17 soldiers she'd saved before the end. She was a ghost, like Allar, a reminder that women in war could bleed but rarely be remembered. The radio crackled. Morrison's voice came through, confident, clipped. The op was on schedule. They were moving. And she sat there, hands still, heartbeat steady, as if she knew what was coming. Dust stirred outside, carried by night wind down from the ridges. The sky deepened into that endless Afghan black, stars sharp, cold, eternal. She checked her rifle one more time. Not Morrison's malfunctioning weapon, but her own. The one she had rebuilt 17 times. Springs, pins, screws, all calibrated, cared for. Precision wasn't an accident. It was devotion. She whispered to herself, barely audible, between heartbeats, a mantra, a promise. And somewhere deep inside, a quiet question echoed. How many more lives would she have to save before one man looked at her and saw more than a ghost? The radio buzzed again, urgent, a hitch in the voice. She leaned forward, listening. Morrison's team was in position, and then static shouts clipped reports. Movement in the dead space she had warned about. Her breath caught. The ambush had begun. How long does 40 seconds last when men are screaming for help? The first call came clipped, jagged through the radio static. Contact front, multiple PKMs taking heavy fire. A second voice overlapped, urgent, desperate. We've got wounded, repeat, we've got. Static swallowed the rest. Then the crack of machine guns filtered faintly through the feed, distant thunder rolling down the valley. Allar Voss froze only long enough to breathe once. Inhale, exhale, her grandfather's rhythm. Then she moved. She adjusted the headset, fingers steady though her pulse hammered in her throat. She could hear Morrison shouting orders, his tone cracking as chaos swallowed their plan. The overwatch grid had collapsed exactly where she'd warned it would. Taliban fighters had slipped through the blind zone and set up interlocking fields of fire. The team was pinned. She imagined it in her mind, like she always did. Men pressed behind a crumbling wall, dust clouds rising where rounds chewed through stone. Shouts over the thud of RPGs being prepared. The valley itself working against them, funneling Morrison's team into a kill box. She wanted to look away, wanted not to hear the panic. But that wasn't who she was. Every sound cut into her like splinters, young voices breaking under fear, breaths ragged with pain. Another report burst through. 2 down, need medevac now, tourniquets applied. Then another voice, ragged. I'm black on ammo, nothing left. It was happening too fast. The quick reaction force was still 20 minutes away, air support grounded by weather, no cavalry coming. And Morrison's marksman. She heard his frustration over the net, cursing, firing, then silence. His rifle couldn't reach the angles, and the MRAD, the one tossed at her feet hours earlier, jammed uselessly after the first shot. She could picture it, a spent casing lodged stubbornly in the chamber, extractor claw slipping on brass. A $10,000 paperweight in the middle of a firefight. She clenched her jaw. This was it, the moment between choices. Stay seated, let the chain of command bury her in silence while men bled out, or move, break the rules, and become the ghost everyone whispered she wasn't supposed to be. Master Sergeant Williams appeared in the doorway. His face said everything. He'd heard it too. Without a word, he tilted his head toward the northern tower, the only position with a clean view of the valley. But Morrison intercepted her first. He barreled through the TOC, eyes wild, sweat slick across his temples. He saw her reaching for her kit, and his voice snapped like a whip. "Negative, you are not leaving this tent. Your supports stay in your lane." She didn't flinch. "You're blind out there," she said softly, almost too calm. His face reddened. "You'll compromise security, chain of command." Williams grabbed Morrison by the plate carrier, yanking him close. "Chain of command won't matter if you're dead in 10 minutes. You want to write letters to 6 families, Captain. Or you want to swallow your pride and vector her onto targets." Silence. The radio filled the space. Shouts, suppressed gunfire, a soldier sobbing into the mic as he begged for more ammunition. That broke him. Morrison's shoulders slumped. He stepped aside, fury warring with fear in his eyes. Allar didn't waste a second. She slung her rifle, cinched her plate carrier, and moved. 52 pounds of gear, every ounce earned. She sprinted across the compound, boots striking dirt like hammers. The night air cut sharp against her lungs, thinner at elevation, every breath burning. She didn't care. The ladder to the tower rose in front of her, steel cold under her gloves. She climbed fast, rifle slapping against her back with each pull. At the top, she dropped into position, the valley spilling wide beneath her. And there they were. The Taliban, 13 fighters moving with practiced coordination, using the terrain like they'd been born from it. She spotted PKM gunners laying belts across low stone walls. RPG teams crouched behind ridges, rockets angled down toward Morrison's pinned men. She saw runners carrying extra ammunition, silhouettes shifting under moonlight. Her breath slowed. She pulled the scope to her eye, Schmid and Bender glass slicing the night into clarity. Distance markers lit her reticle. 743 meters, 1,123, 1,347. The farthest nearly 1,500 meters out. And the wind, gusting 8 to 12 knots from the northwest, full value. She tried Morrison's MRAD first protocol if nothing else. She chambered a round, exhaled, pressed the trigger. Click. The extractor failed again, casing stuck stubborn. Useless. She tossed it aside, no hesitation. Her own rifle came up, clean, precise, a living extension of her. Zeroed just yesterday at 1,200 meters. She adjusted elevation, felt the rhythm of her breathing align with the valley's silence. Then she fired. The PKM gunner dropped instantly, weapon falling limp. A heartbeat later, return fire ripped back toward the tower. Tracers lit the air. She didn't move, didn't flinch. She was in the zone now, the silence her grandfather spoke of. Second target, 1,123 meters, moving laterally. She calculated lead without thinking, squeezed between heartbeats. A body crumpled mid-step. Morrison's voice broke over the net. Suppression easing, moving wounded. But she wasn't done. She tracked to the RPG team. One was bracing the tube, about to fire. She adjusted elevation, 743 meters. The shot cracked through the night and the fighter fell backward, rocket unfired. She didn't pause, didn't think. Every target was already solved in her mind before she lined up the reticle. 4 fighters rushing through a wadi. She dropped them one by one, center mass, each fall timed like notes in a grim symphony. Voices on the radio changed. Less panic, more urgency, hope pushing through fear. Keep firing, she's holding them down. Her pulse stayed steady. She was a metronome now, every shot measured. Then came the spotter. She saw the glint of binoculars at 1,411 meters, far edge of her range. He was calling in mortar adjustments. She dialed elevation 4, 1 mils high, then waited. Wind gusted, died, gusted again. She waited for stillness, just one breath of quiet air. She fired. The figure slumped behind the rock, binoculars slipping into dirt. She knew what that meant. Mortar fire gone, air cleared. But there were more. 2 fighters breaking from cover, moving fast, desperate. She fired twice, 3 seconds apart. Both went down. In under 4 minutes, 11 enemies lay scattered across the valley. The survivors ran north, abandoning the fight. She let them go. Her job wasn't vengeance. It was protection. Silence returned, broken only by Morrison's strained voice. All elements moved to extraction. QRF inbound, we're clear. Clear. Allar exhaled. She lowered her rifle, fingers trembling slightly now that the storm had passed. Her chest ached with the effort of holding steady through chaos. But she didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She just breathed. From the tower, she watched Black Hawks sweep over the ridge, rotors hammering the night. Gunners searched for threats but found none. Morrison's team moved, carrying their wounded, every man alive because of her shots. 43 minutes had passed since the first trigger pull. 11 enemies neutralized. 0 friendly dead. Down in the dirt of that valley, Morrison's pride lay broken beside spent brass. Up in the tower, Allar Voss had become something else entirely. A ghost no longer. Why was he shaking when he handed her the coin? The firefight was over. The valley lay quiet, the Black Hawks long gone, the compound settling back into its uneasy rhythm. Dust still hung in the air, kicked up by rotors, clinging to every surface. Soldiers walked with that slow, shell-shocked pace, the one that comes after surviving what should have killed them. Allar Voss sat alone in the arms room, rifle broken down on the table in front of her. Bolt carrier stripped, chamber gleaming clean under fluorescent light. Her hands moved with mechanical precision. Wipe, oil, reassemble. The ritual kept her steady, each motion a reminder that order still existed. The door creaked. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. She felt his presence before she saw him. Captain Derek Morrison. He lingered in the doorway longer than she expected. His boots scuffed once, twice before he stepped inside. His uniform was streaked with dirt, his face drawn, a shadow under his eyes that hadn't been there this morning. His hands, she noticed them first. One curled into a fist at his side, the other holding something small, glinting faintly. She finished reassembling the rifle before she spoke, her voice quiet, even. Extractor claws shot. That's why your MRAD kept jamming. Dust gets into the spring channel, weakens the tension. He didn't answer, didn't ask, just stood there, shoulders heavy. Finally, he crossed the room. He stopped in front of her, hand extending. A challenge coin rested in his palm, etched and worn. Team 519. Special Forces. The kind of coin you didn't give lightly. The kind you only handed over when someone had saved your life. His hand trembled slightly as she reached out and took it. No words at first, just a silence so thick it pressed against the walls. Then he met her eyes, and for the first time since she'd known him, there was no arrogance, no dismissiveness, just a raw honesty stripped bare by near death. "I was wrong," he said, his voice cracked. He cleared his throat, tried again. "You kept us alive out there, every one of us." She studied him, the same man who had called her Girl Scout hours earlier, who had dismissed her warnings, laughed at her presence. And now here he stood, eyes hollow from the weight of almost losing everything, offering respect he could no longer deny. She slipped the coin into her pocket, not to treasure it, Not yet, but to hold onto the weight of the moment. Proof that truth could break through pride, sometimes only after the brink of disaster. Morrison sat heavily on an ammo crate, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. He stayed that way a long time, breathing slow, ragged breaths. She let him sit. She understood. The first time she realized how fragile life was, how a trigger pull could mean existence or extinction, she'd felt that same collapse, that same trembling recognition of mortality. Finally he spoke again, softer. "I thought you were just intel." Her lips curved, not quite a smile, more like the shadow of one. "That's the point." He looked up, confusion etched across his face. She could have explained how her file was scrubbed, her role buried under classifications, how every mission she'd ever taken part in had her name erased, credit reassigned. But she didn't. Let him wonder. Let the mystery gnaw. Because explaining wouldn't change the truth. Officially, she was nobody. The after-action report would prove it. Hours later, she read it herself, typed clean, filed away. Emergency marksmanship support provided by unnamed intelligence analyst. No mention of the 11 lives she ended. No record of the 11 American lives she preserved. Just a ghost entry in the margins. Her name was gone again. She closed the file, stomach heavy, and walked outside. The night air was cooler now, stars spread wide overhead. She tilted her head back, letting the silence swallow her. Inside, the others celebrated. Relief laughter, the kind that came after walking the edge of death and stepping back. She could hear it through the walls, but she didn't join. She couldn't. Instead, she thought of Jennifer Matthews. Thought of the message Jennifer once whispered after a mission. "We'll never be remembered, Allar. Not the way they are, but we'll know. And maybe that's enough." Was it enough? She pulled the coin from her pocket, turned it in her hand. The metal caught starlight, gleaming faintly. It felt heavier than it should have, not for what it symbolized, but for what it didn't erase. 87 kills. She kept count, not because she wanted to, but because each one carried a weight, not numbers, names she'd never know, faces she'd only glimpse through glass, men who would never breathe again because her trigger finger said so. She had learned long ago to separate necessity from cruelty. Every shot had been to protect, not to dominate. But still, they haunted her. Not in nightmares. In quiet moments like this under vast foreign skies when silence gave them room to whisper back. She closed her hand around the coin, pressing metal into her palm until it hurt. Pain was grounding. Pain reminded her she was alive. Footsteps approached. She tensed, instinctively slipping the coin back into her pocket. But it was Williams. He leaned against the wall beside her, arms crossed, eyes scanning the horizon like he'd done it 1,000 times before. "You did good," he said simply. She didn't answer. "They'll never put it in the report," he added after a beat. "But the team knows, Morrison knows, that'll spread faster than any file." She let out a soft breath, and when it does. He turned to her then, a half-smile hidden in his beard. "Doesn't matter, you don't do this for them." She looked at him, searching for doubt. Found none. Just a quiet certainty born from years in the shadows. He knew what it meant to fight invisible wars. They stood together in silence a while longer, the kind of silence that felt less lonely when shared. Later that night, alone in her bunk, she lay staring at the ceiling. The compound was quiet, save for the occasional hum of generators. Her rifle leaned against the wall within arm's reach, spotless after her meticulous care. The coin rested on the small table, glinting faintly in the dim light. She closed her eyes, but instead of rest, memories unspooled. Montana fields, her grandfather's voice, Jennifer's laugh, the look in Morrison's eyes when he realized pride had nearly killed him, the cries over the radio, the weight of lives balanced on ounces of steel. Her chest tightened. She turned onto her side, curling slightly, hand reaching instinctively toward the coin. Cold metal against warm skin. She whispered into the dark, words no one else would hear. between heartbeats. Sleep didn't come easy. It never did. By morning, the coin remained where she'd left it, heavy with unspoken truths. Outside, the sun burned the mountains gold. Soldiers moved about with new energy, their laughter sharper, their steps lighter. Life, briefly, felt possible again. For Allar Voss, it was just another day, another mission waiting, another silence to hold. But somewhere in the quiet of her mind, a truth took root. She could keep being their ghost, or she could find a way to step into the light, even if just for those who came after her. And that choice, though she didn't know it yet, was coming sooner than she imagined. Why did they send a command sergeant major for one ghost soldier? 3 weeks passed before the Black Hawks came again, dust boiling into the sky, rotors chopping through the thin Afghan air. The sound pulled every soldier on the compound to the wire. Visitors rarely came without reason. Command didn't waste flight hours for routine. Allar Voss leaned in the shadow of the motor pool, watching. She spent those weeks as she always did, monitoring feeds, piecing together patterns, pretending to be what her file claimed. The firefight in the valley had become a memory, filed away like so many others. Morrison's team rotated out, their faces thinner, eyes older. Before they left, each man found her in quiet moments. No speeches, no fanfare, just brief nods, handshakes, silent gratitude. Whispers moved faster than paperwork. And whispers had reached Fort Bragg. The door of the bird slid open, and out stepped Command Sergeant Major Roberts. Stocky, weathered, eyes like stone. He scanned the compound with a gaze that weighed every detail, then walked with deliberate stride toward the TOC. Conversations stopped in his wake. Even the Afghan interpreters gave him space. Allar didn't move. She already knew in her bones, that he hadn't come for Morrison or Williams or anyone else. He had come for her. She met him in the TOC hours later, after he'd pulled the officers into a closed-door session. Morrison emerged first, face unreadable, posture stiff. He glanced at her once, a flicker of something between guilt and respect, then kept moving. Then Roberts called her name, not analyst, not support. Staff Sergeant Voss. She entered. He sat at the head of the table, cap resting on the wood, hands clasped. His voice carried gravel and command in equal measure. "You've been busy," he said. She said nothing. The right answer didn't exist. He studied her, eyes narrowing slightly. 11 men neutralized in under 4 minutes. Wind, elevation, full-value gusts, suppression that let an ODA walk out alive. Her throat tightened. The report had been scrubbed, erased. Yet here he was reciting it detail for detail, proof that ghosts could be seen, just not on paper. How? He asked, not accusation, genuine curiosity. She thought of her grandfather's ranch, of long Montana summers spent reading Mirage off dirt roads, of calloused hands teaching her to breathe through fear. She thought of Jennifer Matthews, of every night spent cleaning her rifle like it was scripture. But she didn't say any of that. She just met his gaze and said, training, discipline, purpose. He leaned back, lips pressing into something that almost resembled a smile. That'll do. Then he slid a folder across the table. Orders. You're being reassigned, he said. Special Operations Target Interdiction Course. Stateside. Instructor billet. Her stomach nodded. Instructor. Not operator. Pulled from the field, buried behind ranges and chalkboards. She felt the sting of it, being sidelined again, not for lack of skill, but because recognition had limits. She could save lives in silence, but she could never wear the record. Roberts must have seen it on her face. You'll never get credit, he said plainly. Not in ink, not in medals. The politics won't allow it. But you'll train the ones who do. And every shot they fire right, every soldier who walks home instead of bleeding out, that'll be your legacy. She looked down at the folder, hands still. Legacy, a word heavy with both promise and loss. He stood, towering over her even without trying. You've already proven you can carry lives on your shoulders. Now you'll shape the future. precision doesn't care about gender, doesn't care about files. It just cares about discipline. Pass that on. And with that he left. No handshake, no coin, just orders and truth. That night she sat on her bunk, staring at the papers. The compound buzzed with its usual sounds: laughter, cards slapping against tables, boots scraping gravel. She felt apart from it all, separated. She reached into her pocket, pulled out Morrison's coin. She turned it in her palm, edges biting against skin. Proof, but not recognition. Memory, but not record. Was Roberts right? Was training enough? Her mind drifted back to Jennifer. If Jennifer had lived long enough to teach others, would things have changed? Would there be more women standing behind rifles, breathing between heartbeats, carrying the silence? The question tore at her. She walked outside, coin clenched in her fist, rifle slung across her back. The mountains loomed under starlight, dark and unyielding. She thought of the valley below, still scarred with bodies unseen, their blood already soaked into dirt. She thought of the young faces in Morrison's team, the relief in their eyes when they realized they'd been spared. Her legacy, Roberts said, but what about hers? Her life, her choices, her battles. Would she be nothing but a whisper, a cautionary tale traded in tents, never carved in stone? She lifted her rifle, peered through the scope at nothing in particular, just the ridgeline. She slowed her breath, felt the familiar rhythm settle in her chest. Between heartbeats, the world grew quiet again. She lowered it, closing her eyes. Maybe Roberts was right. Maybe dignity didn't speak, it acted. And maybe her voice wasn't meant to echo in reports, but in the steady hands of those she trained. Still, when dawn broke, she couldn't shake the ache in her chest. The orders waited on the table. The coin pressed against her palm. The silence pressed harder. By the time the sun crested the ridges, painting the sky with fire, she knew one thing: leaving the field would feel like leaving herself. But perhaps that was the price ghosts paid to shape the future. And so, with trembling hands but steady heart, Staff Sergeant Allar Voss signed the papers. Her battlefield would change, but her war was far from over. Why did they look at her like she didn't belong here either? The training compound back in the States was worlds away from Afghanistan. Pine trees instead of jagged ridges, the smell of cut grass instead of diesel fumes. The air was thicker, easier to breathe, but somehow heavier. No bullets cracked overhead here. No screams over radio nets. Just the steady pop of rifles on ranges, the bark of instructors, the hum of students eager, or pretending to be eager, to learn. Staff Sergeant Allar Voss stood at the edge of the firing line, arms folded, eyes hidden behind dark lenses. She wore the same uniform, but it felt different here, too clean. Her boots weren't caked with dust, her gear not weighed down by silence that could kill. She almost felt like she was play acting, like the files fiction had followed her home. The students noticed. Young soldiers, some fresh out of basic, others with deployments under their belts. They sized her up quickly. She saw it in their eyes, the skepticism, the smirks. Female instructor, analyst background according to rumor. A desk jockey trying to teach precision to men who thought war lived only at the trigger. She'd seen those eyes before. In Morrison, in half the rooms she'd ever entered. It didn't sting the same way anymore. It just confirmed what she already knew. Respect here, like in the valley, would be earned one shot at a time. On the first day she said little. She walked the line, corrected grips, adjusted cheek welds, tapped boots into better stances. Most listened politely but with half an ear, filing her instructions away like background noise. A few ignored her outright, making adjustments only when the male instructors passed by. She let it happen, for now. Because whispers worked here too. It started on day 3, when one of the students missed a target at 800 meters. He cursed under his breath, frustration boiling. Allar crouched beside him, voice calm. "You're chasing the wind too much. Trust the mirage. Watch how it bends." He rolled his eyes, but she didn't move away. She pointed through his scope. "See how the waves angle right? That's full value cross. Hold 3 clicks, not 2. Reluctantly he adjusted, fired. The steel plate rang sharp across the range. His eyes flicked to her, surprise breaking through arrogance. She just nodded once and walked on. That night whispers started in the barracks. The ghost, someone called her. Nobody knew where it began, but the word spread. They said she'd saved a team in Afghanistan, dropped more fighters than some platoons see in a year. They said she'd carried a coin from special forces, though nobody had seen it. A legend passed in fragments. She didn't confirm it. She didn't deny it. She just showed up every morning, calm and steady, as if the stories meant nothing. But inside she wrestled. Teaching was different. In combat, the rifle spoke for her. Here, she had to trust that her words, her corrections, her patience would live longer than her trigger pull. And patience wasn't always easy when arrogance met truth. She thought of Robert's words, precision doesn't care about gender. It just cares about discipline. So she taught discipline, ruthlessly. She made them run drills until their hands blistered, then made them clean rifles until every pin shone. She taught them to breathe between heartbeats, to feel the stillness instead of fighting it. Some resisted, some mocked, but slowly, painfully slowly, respect began to form. On the 5th week, she demonstrated. The instructors set up a long-range challenge. Targets staggered from 600 to 1,400 meters, wind gusting across open ground. The students gathered, arms crossed, skeptical smirks ready. She lay prone, adjusted her scope, and said nothing. One by one, the steel plates sang out, 600, 800, 1,000, 12, 14. No misses, not one. She stood, dusting off her uniform, and walked back without a word. Silence followed her. The smirks were gone. Whispers grew louder after that. She's the ghost, she's real. But whispers weren't enough for her, not this time. At night she lay awake in her quarters, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the absence of the valley's chaos. No radio crackle, no urgent calls for fire, just quiet, too quiet. And in that quiet the faces returned. 87, some clear, some blurry, all heavy. She wondered if this was what Jennifer would have wanted, to live long enough to teach, to pass on hard-earned lessons instead of vanishing as a footnote. Maybe this was the real fight, not pulling triggers, but making sure the next generation understood what those triggers meant. Still, she missed the field, missed the purpose that came when seconds meant survival. Here, time stretched too easily, days blurred, the urgency was gone. One evening, Morrison appeared, unexpected. He walked the range like a man carrying ghosts of his own. She hadn't seen him since Afghanistan. His uniform bore new lines of fatigue, his eyes carried shadows she recognized. He didn't say much, just watched her class, hands clasped behind his back. The students whispered his name, some recognizing his patch, his reputation. Afterward, he approached her quietly. They listen to you now. She shrugged, some do, some don't. He nodded, looking out over the field. They will. There was a pause, the kind that felt heavier than words. Then he added softly, I told them what you did, not in reports, just in stories. They'll carry that. She studied him, searching for mockery, found none, only sincerity. You didn't have to, she said. Yes, he replied, I did. Then he left, his presence lingering long after he disappeared. That night she pulled out the coin again, turning it over in her palm. Between that coin and Robert's orders, her path had been reshaped. Not the one she wanted, maybe, but maybe the one she needed. The next morning she walked the line with sharper eyes, steadier voice. She corrected grips, adjusted scopes, repeated the same lessons again and again until they sank in. Some resisted less. Some leaned forward when she spoke. Progress small but progress. And when one of the younger soldiers asked in a hushed voice, "Is it true? Did you really?" She just looked at him, calm and unflinching, and said, "Focus on your shot. The rest doesn't matter." But deep down, she knew it did matter. Not for her, for them. For every future soldier who might find themselves in a valley with minutes left to live, waiting for a ghost they didn't know existed. If she could prepare them, if she could make them see precision not as numbers but as purpose, maybe her silence would finally carry weight. And maybe, just maybe, dignity would find a way to outlive her. How do you measure the worth of a lesson when you'll never see it carried out? It was late autumn when the call came. Allar Voss was walking the range, pine needles crunching under her boots, the air sharp with frost. Her students were packing up after a long day, rifles slung, chatter loose and easy. She felt both pride and restlessness watching them, pride in their progress, restlessness in her own stillness. Then her phone buzzed, unmarked number. She hesitated, then answered. Staff Sergeant Voss. The voice was clipped official. We're calling on behalf of Captain Morrison. He said you'd want to know. She froze, stomach tightening. Want to know what? Private First Class Daniels, the voice continued. Your student, deployment to Kunar province. His unit made contact 3 days ago. The words came slowly, everyone heavy. He credits his survival and the survival of his team to the training you provided. Precision fire at extended range. Suppression under duress. His after-action statement repeated something about breathing between heartbeats. Her breath caught. Daniels neutralized 4 enemy combatants at distances exceeding 900 meters, provided cover until QRF arrived. 2 wounded saved. He insisted we tell you. She didn't answer, couldn't, her throat locked. The line clicked dead. She stood there on the range, wind biting her cheeks, students laughing in the distance. Her body felt rooted, immovable. Daniels, she remembered him clearly. Young, eager, too quick to rush shots in the first weeks. She stood behind him more than once, tapping his shoulder, whispering calm. Slow down, trust the silence. Between heartbeats, that's where the shot lives. And now, halfway across the world, those words had carried men home. Her knees nearly buckled. She lowered herself to the ground, sitting in the dirt, rifle case beside her. She pressed her hands against her face, breath shaking. She had wanted proof. Proof that teaching mattered. That whispering into the void of classrooms and ranges wasn't wasted. And now it was here, not in her own hands, not in her own scope, but in the trigger pull of someone she'd trained. And the weight of it broke something open inside her. Tears came, quiet and unstoppable, not for herself, not for recognition, for the knowledge that maybe Jennifer had been right, that even ghosts could echo through others. Later that evening, the students gathered in the mess hall. She sat apart, coin warm in her palm, listening as they talked. Daniel's story had already spread. They didn't know she'd received the call. They didn't know she'd trained him directly. But the whispers began again, softer this time, reverent. The ghost's lesson saved a team in Kunar. She clenched the coin tighter, not pride, something deeper, a quiet grief mixed with hope. But doubt remained. Because she hadn't been there. She hadn't pulled the trigger. Someone else had. And though that was the point of teaching, part of her still ached for the certainty of her own hands on the rifle, her own scope cutting through chaos. Weeks passed. Winter settled over the compound. Students rotated in and out, each one another chance to pass on fragments of herself. Some listened. Some resisted. All left carrying at least a piece of her discipline. Yet at night the question gnawed. Was it enough? Was echoing through others truly the same as standing in the dirt, rifle steady, saving lives directly? One night she dreamed of the valley again. Morrison's voice cracking over the net, PKMs rattling, RPGs thudding. She dreamed of dust in her teeth, of brass hot against her skin. She woke in darkness, heart racing, the silence of her quarters unbearable. She rose, pulled on boots, and walked to the range. Midnight, frost thick across the grass, stars sharp overhead like Afghanistan all over again. She lay prone, rifle steady, sighting downrange at silhouettes lit faintly by moonlight. No targets set, no scoring, just her and the silence. She breathed slow, Inhale, exhale between heartbeats. She fired. The crack echoed sharp, startling the night. Another and another, each shot steady, each breath controlled. By the time she stopped, her chest had eased, but her eyes stung. Because she realized then, she would always be caught between two worlds, the ghost who had lived unseen in combat and the instructor tasked with shaping futures. One gave her purpose in the moment. The other gave her purpose beyond herself. The next morning she addressed her students with unusual sharpness. "Listen to me," she said, voice cutting through chatter. "When you're out there, you won't remember my name. You won't remember my face. But you'll remember this: patience saves lives. Pride kills. Between heartbeats, you choose who makes it home." They grew quiet, really quiet. She saw in their faces that the words had landed, maybe not fully understood, but carried like seeds. And that was all she could do: plant seeds, pray they bloomed when needed most. Later, Williams called. He'd rotated stateside for a temporary billet. He'd heard about Daniels too. His voice carried warmth. "You see now?" he asked. "See what?" she replied. "That you don't have to be there to be there. You've changed the math. You're multiplying yourself." She wanted to believe it. She wanted to let his words be enough. But deep inside, the ache remained. Because ghosts, no matter how far they reached, still lived unseen. And she wasn't sure if unseen was the same as free. What happens when a ghost is asked to step into the light? It started small, as whispers always did. A journalist embedded with a ranger battalion wrote a piece about survival in Kunar. He mentioned a young private named Daniels, praised his calm under fire, quoted his words. "My instructor told me to breathe between heartbeats. That's why I'm here." The article spread. Soldiers shared it, families clipped it, and somewhere in the ripples her name surfaced. Not in print, not in official record, but in hushed speculation. Who had taught Daniels? Who had drilled patience into his hands until it became reflex? The whispers reached the compound. Students glanced at her differently, some with awe, some with suspicion. A few asked outright in voices careful with reverence. "Was it you?" She never answered, just told them to focus on their shots. But command noticed too. Not Roberts this time. Higher. Civilian suits in Washington, the ones who weighed politics heavier than bullets. They saw the story gaining traction. They smelled opportunity. One afternoon, she was called into an office she'd never set foot in before. A colonel she didn't know sat behind a polished desk, a civilian beside him. The civilian smiled too much, a politician's smile. "Staff Sergeant Voss," the colonel began, voice neutral. "There's interest in highlighting excellence in training. Daniel's story has created momentum. There's an opportunity here, a face for the future of Army marksmanship, a female face." The civilian leaned forward, hands folded. "Representation matters, Sergeant. Imagine the impact, young women across the country seeing you, hearing your story, knowing they can stand where you stand." Her stomach tightened, her story. The words tasted bitter, because her story wasn't just skill and inspiration. It was being erased, silenced, buried under classifications. It was 87 lives taken, unacknowledged, unseen. It was Jennifer's death, Morrison's coin, Robert's orders. It was ghosts and whispers, not headlines. She stayed silent. The colonel filled the pause. "We're not asking you to reveal classified details, just to step forward. Photos, a feature in the Army Times, maybe a spot on a recruitment campaign. The message is bigger than the details." The civilian's smile widened. "It's time, Sergeant. Don't you want to be seen?" She almost laughed, a hollow, aching laugh. Did she want to be seen? Of course. Every fiber of her had once craved recognition, not for pride but for the dignity of truth. But not like this. Not stripped of reality, painted in broad strokes for politics. Not a sanitized version of who she was. Her voice, when it came, was steady but cold. "I don't do this for stories. I do it so they live." The civilian's smile faltered. The colonel's brow furrowed. Silence thickened. Finally, the colonel cleared his throat. "Think about it, that's all we ask." They dismissed her. She walked out, pulse pounding, coin heavy in her pocket. She stepped into cold air, lungs filling with the sharp sting of winter. Her mind spun. Recognition, visibility. For years she'd been a ghost, her name erased, her actions hidden. And now, when it suited politics, they wanted her face. Not her truth, just her face. That night she couldn't sleep. She sat at her desk, rifle disassembled in front of her, parts gleaming under lamplight. Her hands moved automatically, wipe, oil, reassemble, but her thoughts churned. She thought of Daniels, alive because of her lessons. She thought of Jennifer, erased entirely. She thought of Morrison, coin trembling in his hand. She thought of Roberts, telling her legacy lived in what she passed on. Maybe he was right. Maybe stepping into the light would help others. Maybe her silence had carried far enough, and now it was time to speak. But if she spoke, would it still be hers? Or would they twist it until she didn't recognize herself? The next morning she walked the range with eyes sharper than usual. Students lined up, rifles ready. She moved among them, correcting stances, whispering small lessons. Patience saves lives. Pride kills. Between heartbeats you choose. She saw in their faces that her words were landing, not because of headlines, not because of recognition, but because she was there in the dirt teaching, present, real. That night she drafted a letter, not to command, not to politicians, to Daniels. She wrote simply, "I heard what you did. You made the choice between heartbeats. You saved lives, that's all that matters. Carry that forward." She didn't sign her name. She didn't need to. Weeks later, the colonel called her back. The offer still stood. She declined politely but firmly. The politician frowned, frustrated. Why? Her answer was soft but final. Because dignity doesn't need a microphone, it just needs to act. They didn't understand. They wouldn't. But she walked out lighter than she'd felt in months. In the barracks that evening, students whispered again. The ghost, the legend, the instructor who carried stories too heavy to tell, she let them whisper, she let the myth grow, because myths had power, and maybe that was enough. But as she lay in her bunk, staring at the ceiling, she knew the hardest truth of all. The world would never truly see her. And maybe it didn't have to. Maybe ghosts saved lives best when they stayed unseen. Why did the last class feel heavier than the first? Spring came soft that year, green pushing through thawed ground, birds calling over the rifle range. The students lined up like every cycle before them, young faces carrying eagerness, arrogance, fear. She walked the line, correcting grips, whispering patience, steadying their hands. It looked the same as always, but for Allar Voss it felt final. Her orders had come, rotation complete. Another instructor would take her place. She would be reassigned to a quieter billet, one with less range, dust, and fewer echoes of the valley. The army had decided her path again. She didn't fight it, not anymore. The students didn't know, not yet. To them, she was just the ghost who whispered lessons and made steel sing at distances they couldn't believe. But she knew, and the weight of that knowledge pressed heavy with every correction, every nod, every silent glance. On the last day she set up a demonstration. Not for them, not really, for herself. She chose the long range, targets staggered across rolling ground, wind shifting unpredictably. She lay prone, adjusted her scope and breathed. Between heartbeats, the world went still. One by one she sent rounds downrange. 600, 800, 1,000, 12, 14. Every plate rang, every shot true. The students cheered, some clapping, some shaking their heads in disbelief. She stood, brushing dirt from her uniform, and turned to face them. Her voice carried calm and gravity, steadier than any round she'd ever fired. "You think this is about steel plates," she said. "It is. It's about choice. Every trigger pull is a choice, to protect, to save, to end. The rifle doesn't care. The wind doesn't care, but you will. Every life you carry, theirs and yours, will stay with you. Don't chase glory, don't chase numbers, chase purpose. Between heartbeats, you'll know why you're here. And when you make that choice, make it count. Silence followed, the kind that meant they understood at least enough to carry it forward. Later, as the sun dipped low, she dismissed them. Some shook her hand. Some saluted. A few simply nodded, eyes heavy with something they couldn't name. She let them go one by one until the range was empty. She sat alone for a long time after, rifle across her lap, the sky bleeding gold and crimson. She thought of Montana fields, of her grandfather's steady voice. She thought of Jennifer Matthews, gone too soon. She thought of Morrison's trembling coin, Robert's blunt truth, Daniel's survival. She thought of 87 lives ended and countless more saved. And she thought of the word that had followed her like a shadow, ghost. Was she one? Perhaps, but ghosts weren't always curses. Sometimes they were guardians, silent, unseen, but always there when needed most. She reached into her pocket, pulled out Morrison's coin, and held it against the fading light. The metal gleamed, warm and solid in her palm. Proof, not of recognition, but of truth. Proof that dignity didn't always need to shout. Sometimes it whispered. Sometimes it acted. The wind picked up, carrying pine scent across the field. She closed her eyes, breath deep, and let the silence settle inside her. For the first time in years, it didn't feel empty. It felt whole. The next morning, she packed her gear. No fanfare, no ceremony, just another ghost slipping quietly into orders. Students would whisper her legend long after she was gone. Operators would tell stories in tents, half-truths wrapped in awe. Some would never know her name. Others would never forget her lessons. She left the range without looking back. And somewhere across oceans, a young soldier steadied his rifle in chaos, whispered between heartbeats, and chose life over death. That was her legacy. Not medals, not headlines, not recognition, just lives carried forward one steady shot at a time. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.